All right, I'm going to call to order the meeting of the Johnson County Planning Commission for November 29, 2022. Let's start with a roll call.
Mike Levin,
Here.
Randy Hutchins is not present. George Lund,
Present.
Jim Neese, Chris Iliff,
Here.
Dave Johns is not present. Kelly Rast. Present. Roger Mason is not present. Lindsay Grisay, not present. Randy Downing.
Here.
Terry Atwell.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Yes.
I'm going to, at this time, turn over, Megan, if you would read the statement with regard to the meeting procedures in Zoom.
This meeting is now being recorded. I'm making sure I'm unmuted on Zoom. So it's actually recording. Please silence all electronic devices. This meeting is being held in the board hearing room with board members attending in person. There is also an option for virtual attendance on Zoom webinar. If you are using Zoom, you may participate in the meeting using your computer, telephone, or other electronic device. For Zoom participants, chat will be disabled once the meeting begins. If you have trouble, please call 913-715-1700. If you would like to speak, please use the raise hand function in the Zoom app to notify planning staff of your desire to speak. To activate this function, click raise hand in the webinar controls at the bottom of the screen. By telephone, you may raise your hand by dialing *9. Please do not use the raise hand function until the beginning of the public comment period. We will take comments from any in-person attendees first, followed by Zoom participants. The Zoom moderator will call on individuals who have raised their hand. The chairman may modify these procedures as needed to conduct an orderly and efficient meeting. All public speakers will be limited to 3 minutes unless the chair designates a different time period. When your name is called by the moderator, your microphone will be unmuted. Please state your name and address for the record, followed by your comments. If you share the same comments as others, please refrain from repeating those comments and instead note for the record that you agree with the previous comments. There will be a 10-second remaining warning sound. Please state your name, or this is for board members and presenters. Please state your name every time you begin talking so that comments can be transcribed for the record. This is a public meeting. We are presenting live and recording the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. I appreciate that. Now is the opportunity for public comment. I don't see any members of the public here. Is there anyone on Zoom as far as you can tell?
No, I do not see anyone on Zoom.
Okay, well, if there's no one on Zoom, no members of the public are present here, so we will go on to our next item, D, which is the disclosure of conflict of interest in ex parte communications by members. Are there any disclosures that need to be made by members of the Planning Commission? Hearing none, we will move on. Is there any recommendations for changes or deletions to the agenda? All right. And the last meeting that we have minutes of are the August 23rd, 2022 meeting minutes. Do I hear any recommendations for changes, amendments, deletions from the minutes of the August 23rd meeting? Hearing none, do I hear a motion to approve them?
So move.
George Lund?
George Lund, second.
Okay. All right, so it's been moved and seconded. And all those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. The meeting minutes for August 23 are therefore approved. The next item is with regard to the regulating of accessory buildings. And I think we've got someone who would like to make a presentation. Jay, did you want to make any preliminary
Yes.
comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jay Leipzig, Planning Director. This item is we've discussed this quite a few times in the past in terms of looking at making some modifications to our accessory structure regulations as part of our subdivision regulations. Tonight, we're hoping to have just a high-level overview discussion to get some feedback from you in terms of what some possible solutions might be. Staff does have some ideas, but Michelle's PowerPoint and memo is going to talk a little bit about some of the historical trends that we're seeing in regard to accessory structures. And we have some proposed ideas for you to think about. Tonight, obviously, there's not a formal draft before you. This is just a high-level discussion of what those changes might be and what we can do about them. I think it's something that if we look at over the past 11, 12 years, there has been some definite trends in accessory structures that we didn't see forthcoming when the regulations were originally adopted. So I think it's probably long overdue to look at this again. And tonight will be just kind of that preliminary discussion of that topic. So that I'll turn it over to Michelle Leininger. And I'm not sure if Michelle's been in front of the Planning Commission before or not. So this is her first time before you.
Yeah, let me just make this comment. I thought that the report that was prepared for us was very well done, and it really helped to explain what the situation is and what the problem is and how we might, I think, can envision simplifying things going forward. I know that in the 20 plus years that I was on a zoning board, I don't think we ever turned down an accessory building application, conditional use permit application. So please proceed forward.
Good evening, Michelle Leininger, planning staff. Man, I feel like all my stuff's been talked about already. But what I want to do is kind of go through the memo briefly. I'll give you a description of some of the attachments that were in with the packet. And, you know, as Jay said, we don't have a draft for you. We have ideas. We have, which are high level ideas and things that we have noted that could potentially be in a text amendment. So really tonight, we are getting your feedback so that we can bring you a text amendment. We need to get that feedback so that we aren't bringing you something that is completely sideways from what the Planning Commission would like to see. So really tonight is the brief presentation by myself and then lots of discussion, hopefully. So this is in your memo. This is a summary of historical data. Yes, I have a whole big spreadsheet that accompanies it, but just some of the details. Over the past 11 years, 47 CUPs for oversized accessory buildings. This does not include the ones that were for example, having more than 3 accessory buildings on a site. Yeah, that's quite a few. There are some renewals that were listed in there, but really what we did is we took the numbers and crunched them, and really this paints a picture of where we've been. Like the chairman said, none of those have been recommended for denial or denied. So that shows us that, yes, something needs to happen. And these numbers really paint the picture of what people are requesting. You know, we have what the average and basically what the mid numbers are of the proposed accessory building size. Sometimes it's a second, third accessory building. Sometimes it's just the first one. What the average size of what is permitted on the lots, the amount over what is permitted, and then the percent over what's permitted. And you'll notice in the table, the 60% is what is highlighted in red. And that's what I use for a starting point for a discussion for the accessory building sizes that I've listed in the key points. We took 60%, that's our median percent over, and that's what we use for the 1440 and the 480 square feet for the possible increases. So that gives us really something concrete to stand on. You're not just saying, well, we'll pick this number out of the air. And so we have that historical data, at least to start from. So this was in your packet. This is actually one, these two are both more recent conditional use permits. This one, the request was for a 1,728 square foot building. The max for the lot was 1,131 square feet. And, you know, looking at it, looks relatively reasonable, the lot size and such. Here is another one. The request was for a 2,552 square foot building with a 704 square foot porch, which there's provisions for allowances for covered porches on accessory buildings. The max for the lot for the enclosed accessory building was 1,800 square feet. Like I said, all of these were recommended for approval and then later approved by the Board of County Commissioners. Just going through the memo, I did include some typical garage sizes and then some diagrams of how vehicles could kind of fit with the space around it. Most people want to get other things besides their vehicle in the garage. They want to be able to put a lawnmower or a bike in there or a trash can, something for more space. Generally, we don't get garages like these. Usually they are outbuildings that are less rectangular in shapes. A lot of them are right around the 1,600 square feet. That's a 40 by 40. A 40 by 36 is the 1,440 square feet. I couldn't provide you examples because if you go on the website for, accessory buildings, different places you can get them, you have 20 pages of different options. So it's pretty much by 2 foot dimensions. So sky's the limit on the size, the orientation. And then some things we noted that need to be thought about. What increase in size is needed, if any? Again, in the first page of the memo, I use 60% for the number increase. Is that not enough? Should it be more? Should it be less? That is a question we need to discuss. Should size limits be broken out into more categories? Currently, our categories are less than 1 acre, you get a certain amount. If you're over 1 acre but less than 10 acres, you get a certain amount. And if you're 10 acres and over, there's not a limitation.
I'm sorry, this is Mike Levin. I have a question about that because I have multiple outbuildings on my property. I was under the impression that if you're up to 1 acre, you had a certain amount of square footage, then for every acre added on to that,
Right.
it added on up to 10 acres. So it does change.
Thank you for.
Okay.
It's a prorated, you get 900 square feet for the first acre. And then you get an additional 300 square feet for every acre in addition to the one up to 10 acres. And that's prorated. So if you have 1.5 acres, you get that 0.5 portion of the 150 square feet in addition to that 900 square feet. Thank you for pointing that out.
Jimmy, I got a question. So if you had 10 acres, then what would be the size you could have?
There's no limitation on the size for 10 acres and up. You just
Oh,
need
yeah,
to,
oh, then let me say 9 acres.
it would, and I can provide that with the next, I don't have a calculator. So it's 8 times 300 is plus 900.
It'd be 3,300 square feet.
Yeah,
Math
Sean
is-
Penley plan is, it's a calculation.
I just was,
Sure.
that's what I wanted to hear. So 900 plus 300 for every additional acre.
Yep.
And you may be getting to this, but I have another question. On the 1 acre or whatever, are there limits? I can't remember. Are there limits from the setback from the property line?
Yes, there's setbacks outlined in the regulations. Most of them match the setbacks of what you would see with the, basically a house. There's a couple of districts that tweak that a little bit because they have, like the PRU 1B district, you can go smaller on one side and larger on the other. But we don't want those accessory buildings to also be 10 feet from the property line or 5 feet from the property line. We want them to be at least 10 feet. So there's some little caveats in there, but generally it is the same setbacks as the primary structure.
Mr. Neese, Jay Leipzig, that answered your question about if you had a 9-acre property, the maximum size allowed would be 3,300 square feet. The other thing I was going to note, if you look at, and to follow up to Commissioner Levin's comment, on the second bullet of the memorandum under key points for discussion, that takes into account if it was increased by 60%. So you had 1,440 square feet for the first acre and 480 square feet for each additional acre. Kind of using the same system we have now, but augmenting those numbers.
Kelly Rast, is there any place where we take into account for height of the buildings and stuff too?
Those are outlined in each zoning district. Are they outlined? Sorry, Sean,
Yes,
if
it would
you
be,
had
Commissioner, this is Sean Penley planning staff. There are limitations for height, and those are restricted, as Michelle indicated, by the zoning
Yeah.
district. So there are maximum height restrictions that would apply to accessory buildings already. So they have to conform with that, just as they do with setbacks. They're subject to the same setback requirements in that zoning district as the primary structure.
And in the attachment for the text that I sent out, it's B2 and it lists out 2 stories or 30 feet for certain districts, 2 stories or 25 feet for certain districts. And then other districts, it's talks about unless specifically accepted from the height restrictions in Article 17. Excuse me. So there already are restrictions for that. That's not something we typically run into is issues with height. 2 stories will get you typically what you need. Even for if we have buildings that may have a loft area or even, and this is kind of going off topic a little bit, when you add in that accessory dwelling unit. So I don't know that we've ever had any issues with the height.
Yeah, this is Kelly's only reason I bring it up because I did have an issue with height. And it's not so much the height, but I didn't think about it at the time. But if your structure is set on a higher ground compared to your neighbor, and then they're looking straight up at it, it makes a significant difference, even though the height might be in compliance. And it's more
right.
because the 2 structures are sitting on different levels, and it's
Right.
crazy how that can really influence something. So-
And the height is measured that average grade at the front
Mhm.
to the tallest peak. So yes, it could look significantly taller than the house if there's an elevation change.
Mhm. Okay. That can always be looked at as a case by case basis too. Okay.
Along with that, size limitations broken out, In my research, there have been some regulations that I found that had more categories. So they had less than 1 acre, they had a greater than 1 acre to 5 acres. They've had it broken out more like that. Some of them 10 to 20 acres, you had a limitation where we wouldn't, which if that's something you'd like to suggest too, we can always do limitations on something bigger than 10 acres. I don't know that we would recommend that, but it's the planning commission's prerogative.
I'm sorry, this is Mike Levin. I have a question again. Do you know, and you, again, if not, that's fine. Is it ever commonplace for counties when they determine square footage on acreage, it's simply a percentage of the acreage?
I did see a couple of those. It was not commonplace. But sometimes they'll have like building coverage percentages, or they'll have impervious surface percentages. That's an option we can also look at. It's a little more difficult, but definitely something we could consider.
I will say, Commissioner Levin, that is done, that approach is done. It's typical more of in a city type of approach or an urban approach. We'll do that with percentages. The other thing to note is in looking at other regulations throughout the country in terms of, this is pretty standard. In other words, that initial threshold, a certain amount for the first acre, then adding, and that's kind of a standard approach. I think the mystery of it is trying to make a determination of what would be the best approach for Johnson County. But yeah, that approach seems to, that's pretty universal for towns and cities.
Thank you.
Like Jay said, it's really finding that right number for the county. I mean, they varied all over the place. So again, that's why we used our historical data as a starting point for that consideration. Another question to consider is a number permitted adequate. Currently, we allow for 3 accessory buildings. Should that be increased, decreased, not have a limit? Are performance standards needed? And if so, what are they? You can have all kinds of different options of how to, if you meet A, B, C, D, E, then it's jumping right to a building permit, and it would be permitted by right. Currently, we only have a few performance standards, but that could be something that we look more into, especially if we jump to the next one, should the process change. Currently, if you cannot meet the standards outlined in the code, say for an oversized accessory building, more than the permitted, if you wanted to go different things like that, our process is for a conditional use permit. While it's a good process, we run into problems where there's timeframes set on them. So realistically, is that something that we want in our code, where you get approved for a accessory building and 10 years later you have to come back? Unless there's some big issues with it, most likely those renewals will be approved. It's time both for staff and the property owner, minimal fee for that, but still time, money for something that realistically isn't going to be removed.
Jimmy, I got a question on the time. When you have accessory buildings, then why doesn't staff recommend 20 or 30 years? Why, the ones we've looked at we've had a few recently in our zoning board. And, we're talking 20, 30 years. And And then that would eliminate that issue, but at least depending on where the property is, I don't think a time frame is bad. I mean, the staff's argued 20 years is a standard, I think.
Well, the
Been hearing.
code says for conditional use permits, they should be approved for 10 years unless modified by the zoning board and board of county commissioners.
Where do you get the 10 years? Because
I don't know. It's outlined in the term limits in the conditional use section. So it applies to all kinds of conditional use permits. It applies to, topsoil removal and, everything that you could get with a CUP in the county. That's part of a conditional use permit, is that it's required to have a time frame.
I guess my question then would be, should that be looked at? Because one of the main
Right.
arguments that was made for the solar thing, all we heard was 20 years. That's standard,
Right.
standard. So,
And,
I'm-
and
which is fine, but it sounds like you're arguing standard on one side and not
Right.
on these.
And that's, if you let me continue on, I'll get into that.
Okay.
If you want to, Michelle, is Sean Penley, planning staff, as Michelle indicated, she'll cover that, I think, in the next slide or coming up here about the time. One of the things I'll note is that standard for a 10-year term is a standard that's in the regulations today. So unless otherwise specified or recommended by the Planning Commission and BOCC, that's a standard term limit for CUPs. That's where usually the base recommendation comes from. 10 years, that's where we start. But that can always be altered for any typical CUP. But as Michelle mentioned, for accessory buildings, what we might consider, the Planning Commission may want to just do away with the term or require a separate process. So we'll talk about that too as an option.
And more recently, the zoning boards and staff have done that 20-year recommendation because it's, well, for the reasons I said, it's unlikely to not be renewed and such. And so it's a time thing. Something that we as the planning commission could consider, and this is on the back of the memo, the last bullet point, should we make a different process? Currently, CUPs have an expiration date. They have all these details in it for something that is, it's different than a business. It's different than a impactful use that you would typically see with a conditional use permit. Currently in our code for accessory dwelling units, and I'm not sure how many of the commissioners have experienced an application for accessory dwelling unit permits, but that is a process that's set out in the same section. It's a very similar process to a conditional use permit, but it doesn't have that expiration limit. So that's something that staff really likes the idea of, is creating that kind of side process, just like what accessory dwelling unit permits go through. So you would remove that time frame, you would remove some of those duplications of processes in the later, people forget about them, all this stuff. It would go through the same zoning board public hearing process with final action at the Board of County Commissioners. Those details are not in your memo, but it's definitely something that, excuse me, that staff likes the idea of. And honestly, if the Planning Commission is tweaking sizes, tweaking some of those other details for a number and maybe some performance standards, maybe you want to require that the building has to have trees along it or something. As an example, if they meet all these performance standards like it is today with an increased size, they could still just go right to the building permit. or they would go through, this different, I call it an ABS permit. Hopefully we would get less of those with an increase in permitted size.
Mr. Chair, if I could say just a couple of comments, just to
Yes.
follow up on what Michelle just said. I think this, in my opinion, I mean, accessory structure, it's a permanent structure. So I think this idea of removing the term makes some sense. I think it would make life so much easier for everybody. The balancing part of that is having some mechanism that looks at surrounding properties if the area should change dramatically where it doesn't fit in anymore, which I think is an issue that we are going to have to struggle. We all have to struggle with that as the county continues to grow. And it's going to vary throughout the county too. If you look at, what's going to be happening in the DeSoto area versus Stillwell. So we need to have some mechanism that can, those performance specifications to account for changing surroundings of that structure, whatever it might be. But I think to remove the term, would make life so much easier for everyone, for staff, for this board, the Board of County Commissioners. That's where the difficult part of it comes into.
Jimmy, how would you judge then, and somebody is doing a structure in a very probable dense populated area, growth area? Okay, and you've got a 1 acre or 2 acre, whatever. I mean, do you take that into account? I mean, or can you even put that in the equation? I don't know that you can, but certainly, it's something that you would think you'd have to take into consideration somehow. I don't know how.
And those are all things that are built into the review criteria and such for the accessory dwelling unit permit. Goes through the same review for the golden criteria, the neighborhood, the surrounding zoning, all of those details. So they're if we would base it on the same process, there's already review criteria and things that you need to take into consideration that we can build into the code to try to take care of some of that stuff.
And just as an additional follow-up to that comment, that's where Michelle was saying that golden criteria is something that's, over as the area changes over time, those 5 points will always be constant. So, and it's something to measure whatever that the structure would be in terms of measuring it against. So that's where I think, we could, that would be a difficult part is determining what those performance criteria is. But I think basing something on the golden factor, similar to what we use for the dwelling units, makes a lot of sense.
This is Chris Iliff. I live in a part of the county that has had a number of dwellings that were built in excess of 50 years ago that you would call single wides, double wides. They do not fit in the neighborhood as it is developed. Some of these are adjacent to the new Loch Lloyd expansion into Kansas. And it's a little awkward, but this is home for the people who live there. And I think that that's just one of the things that happens. And while I'm very much in favor of loosening our standards here, making it possible for people to get accessory buildings without necessarily going through the entire CUP process, and I would do away with the time limits. As a practical matter, what will happen, not soon, but over time, is that as the non-fitting old single wide, becomes more and more of an eyesore, it just makes it incumbent upon the neighbors to offer more money to that person to make life better for them. And eventually the properties will come into conformity, but it will take a long time. But I don't think that's something that the county can force, and nor is it something that you can foresee with enough clarity to be able to say, well, something only needs to have a 10-year permit or a 20-year permit or something like that. So I'm just going to, from reading your memo earlier and your comments and what I'm hearing here is I would like to see proposed rules that would do away with the time limit on them, that would loosen up the square footage per acre to something that is much closer to the average of what has been permitted over the last 20 years. Since we grant these routinely, since the zoning boards grant them routinely and the Board of County Commissioners passes them, why go through this process if it's a done deal and it's going to be permitted? I would certainly not want to see any laxity in the setbacks. I think it's especially important that those setbacks be enforced. And with regard to performance standards, this is always a tricky thing because it has to do with taste and very subjective evaluations with regard to the appearance of the buildings. But if there's some way that we could recommend or say that the accessory structure be architecturally consistent with the primary building on the property, I think that makes a certain amount of sense, although I'm not sure whether it's enforceable. But those are just some of my ideas, and I'm throwing them out here for discussion with us, not saying that this is what we ought to do, but that I'd like to see if we can have some discussion about that. And maybe you could try your hand at amending the current regulations that kind of take some of that into account.
This is Kelly Ross. I have one question though for clarification. I agree with most of what Chairman Iliff said. Except for you do have to remember if you already have one double wide and they're going to add another double wide, it's going to be the same standards. But that could happen. Anyway, but can you clarify the difference? I'm just thinking of the baseball situation. Like I have no problem if it's a storage dwelling, but what if this dwelling then becomes a business that creates other issues, whether it's traffic noise? And that's what I'm thinking of, like the whole issue on 207th with the baseball business. Would there be a definitive separation between just a storage dwelling that stays a storage dwelling versus someone all of a sudden starting to run a business out of it? Then, like, do you understand what I'm saying? I don't know if I'm...
We would consider that a change of use.
Okay.
If you went from just having a big barn to running a baseball facility out of it, that's no longer an accessory building.
Okay.
That is now something else. And what really comes into play with that are, whether it's permitted or not. Some of the different things like contractor shops, which we see a lot of in the county. There's limitations on the size and of the contractor shop, and if you can have exterior storage or not. Again, that's another process. That's a CUP for a contractor shop. Also comes into play sometimes if you're going to a commercial business is a building code. So if we have situations where, and we do, where an personal accessory building goes to a business at that point, it's a code enforcement issue. And we would contact the property owner and say, okay, you've changed the use of the building. This is a process that you need to do to remedy that. So it's really about that change in the use. It's no longer an accessory building, it's a business. It's no longer a house, it's an office. Is what triggers that.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Jimmy, what's when does it become does it show up yard for a construction site? Because we've had several of those. They're not running a business out of there, but they're show up yard. I can't remember if we have to have a special use permit to show up yard. Sean,
Oh, yeah.
Like
Sean,
that's-
the planning
that's
staff-
an area that's kind of,
Yeah, tie into two of those things. So Michelle mentioned it briefly, but we do allow home occupations. There are certain uses that are allowed in accessory buildings, and they have to follow those standards in the zoning regulations currently. We don't propose any change to that. So we would agree that any change in use, if it's a primary use that's not allowed today under the regulations, whether it's a athletic facility or a contractor shop, those do require conditional use permits, and they will still continue to. So put that aside. This is just what we're talking about is still just for personal storage and uses that are allowed today. So for accessory buildings. For those other uses like a contractor shop or others that do require a CUP, we propose keeping that the same. They should still require that. If it goes into a different type of use or they're proposing a change to allow for a business, absolutely, that should require a CUP if it's even allowed. So we don't propose. Like a store, are you talking about like a storage yard?
no, for example, we had one time where I had he did concrete and
Oh.
4 or 5 of his employees showed up. There was no
Oh.
business going on there, but they would come and leave their trucks, get their company trucks and leave. It's called a show up yard.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can't remember. I think we had to have a special use permit for that, but
Yeah, I think Karen seems to recall that. It sounds like a dispatch use where you've got somebody
Yeah.
dispatching.
we've got a situation out by where I live where it's a accessory building, but there's several people show up and then they leave there. They don't work there. That's just something to think about. I don't.
This is Karen Miller. That activity would be part of a contractor's shop or yard, and that would require a conditional use permit, which has the CUP for a contractor's yard has some pretty strict requirements.
Terry Atwell. I'm along with our chairman. I would kind of like to see us go with that average percent over permitted. So just give you a little bit of background. So I live on 4.5 acres and I was only allowed a 30 by 60 barn. So when Scott and I just recently have calculated out if we could start over, what size farm utility building would we need? And we kind of calculated it at about 4,000 square feet. So, and that would allow us to, keep our big tractor in, any of our implements, our tools, and then would also allow for one of our farm trailers and then my enclosed trailer to actually be put up. And I think cleaning that stuff up to put in a barn kind of benefits the whole area because it's not being left out. And that's why our zoning board really has went above with approving the oversized ones because we like to see them gain enough area to put everything up. The problem that I have with my 30 by 60 with my big tractor is that I'm limited if I have an implement on the back. I can't pull it in and maneuver it. So I'm constantly having to back it in with an implement so that I can go out the big slider. So that's what I would like to see. I would like to see them a little bit bigger so that we can get down to, only 10% coming for CUPs. And then my big issue would be the design standard or the performance standard. I I don't want to feel like our zoning board is, you know, an HOA and all of a sudden we're going to dictate. My preference for a metal building might not match somebody else's. So I don't want to dictate, you know, the size. Well, we are going to dictate the size, but you know, the shape and the design and what your house looks like today, you may upgrade in the future. And then all of a sudden, if we put, performance standards on it, well, now all of a sudden you have a barn that doesn't match the house because you've done, you know, upgrades.
This is Karen Miller, and that's a really good point. And that's was something that was in my mind, is that kind of the rural area versus a more subdivision type of area. And so that actually, that idea was handled in the ADU, ADU accessory dwelling unit regulations that we put up. And so we spent some time talking about what is typical in this rural area, that you typically have kind of these serviceable metal buildings kind of clustered around the home site, versus like a subdivision typically has, you know, homes in a row with similar setbacks, with, if there is a detached garage, that those materials and design tend to mimic the house. So, you know, that actually thinking is already been done. And, you know, Michelle was proposing to pull some of that for that, the proposed ABS permit.
Yeah, and I'm good. I like to see the term removed. Our zoning board, we've went at least 20 years on all of ours. And the question I always ask when the applicant comes and says, well, I just asked for a 10-year. Why did you ask for a 10-year? Well, that's all I thought I could get. Well, in 10 years, are you going to tear your structure down? And they're like, why would I do that? Exactly. So why wouldn't you have asked for a longer term? So we've been very gracious. So I would like to see that removed. And then back to the performance standards where you were talking about maybe doing some screening. I'm just going to say again, I don't like that idea. I'm okay with like a 25-foot building line. I think that's great between the properties. But what I have noticed with some of the large metal buildings out by us that have been let go, when those trees grow up, you have saplings coming up between them. And then if it's not maintained and cut back, because I like a clean yard and clean lines, I would want to be able to maintain between my barn and a tree row. Well, that stuff's going to get to where you can't maintain it anymore. And it gets close enough, it starts rubbing on that metal and it completely takes the finish off. And I would rather not have screening to prevent that type of stuff from happening, because I would rather the barn look nice as opposed to have the screening. Just my take on it.
And I just want to jump in and clarify. So you're talking about the size increase. We have an average and we have a median.
Right.
What I had proposed was the 60% increase, which is the median. The average is an 87%. What was the intention? Was your intention to be that 87% or was it the 60%? I just want to make sure I'm saying the right thing.
Chris Iliff, I thought about this afternoon for quite a bit about the difference between the median and the average. And I think it ought to be the average. I think we ought to go bigger. I think it would create fewer conflicts and fewer needs for conditional use permits.
Terry, I agree with the chairman.
Mr. Chair, just one additional comment on this performance standards. You mentioned before, I think one of the things and I think, you know, we can work with some language on that. But the other point that I mentioned before is the golden criteria is something that could be used to kind of measure that in terms of what the surrounding neighborhood looks like. So it does give us some long-term flexibility on that, something that's reasonable.
And to clarify that, the way that the accessory dwelling unit regulations use the golden criteria is you have the set body of criteria that if you meet it, you get administratively approved. It's just a review. And the golden criteria is not used. The way the golden criteria is used per the ADU requirements is if it exceeds those, the size limits and all of those things, then it goes to a public hearing. And at that point, that would be the golden criteria review. So, because those are, the golden criteria review is, does this meet the character of the neighborhood and that type of thing? And so that's a weighing and balancing that's good for the zoning board.
Do you need, Jim Neese, do you need screening at all? I mean, why would
It
you
was
need
just
it?
something to think about,
Okay,
not.
I don't think you need,
sites
I don't think you need it.
Some sites may be more appropriate for it if it's smaller.
We've looked at screening on big projects and go out there and people put 2-foot pine
You have to
trees.
Remember, we're also talking about like this Kelly Ross, a detached garage. I mean, we are talking Kelly Ross, we are talking about a wide variety of stuff, which is why this kind of complicates it. And I will point out that in the past, everything has gone really smoothly, and that's because people have gone in front of the boards and they've done their due diligence to do something very nice, knowing who their neighbor is or knowing what the area is. So to sit there and say moving forward without a lot of criteria, you could be opening up a can of worms, by not looking, and I'm all for it, but you just have to keep that in mind. The reason it has gone so smoothly is because y'all have been doing a great job making sure that these structures are done well in whatever setting they are. I mean, I know for us, our detached garage had to be done at a very nice level. But if we're talking about a barn out on 4, 5, 10, 20 acres, that's completely different. I mean, I spent more money on that detached garage to make it look nice for my neighbors than I did any other place in my house. And that's what we had to do. So that's, and like I said, there's no problem with it because that's the hoops we jumped through in order to get it done.
So
Yeah,
let me
Terry,
ask,
and I agree with that. It's so when I'm talking farm building because of like what I do. But if you're talking, well, I'm going to use this as a detached garage, that's something totally separate from what I consider a metal pole barn.
So this is Karen Miller, and that is really one of the really important parts when we did accessory dwelling units, when we got this idea of have a portion that's administrative, and then if you go over, then go to a public hearing. We spent a lot of time figuring out what exactly we would be allowing and then setting those standards to allow something administratively that would work all the time, and so that's the important part, is to just be really careful and know what you would be allowing. And
Right. But Terry Atwell, so I mean, it's not like someone's going to go, well, I'm going to put up because I want one, a 40 by 100. And you guys are just going to go, yeah, do whatever you want. No, they still have to go through the application process. They'll still go through, codes, and through you guys, they'll present, stamped plans, and, you'd have to go through the whole entire code system. It's not like you're just going to let somebody have a free for all. You would still fall under regulations. It just wouldn't be a CUP attached to that.
And Michelle Leiniger jumping in here. We do have really your mechanism. If you meet these standards, you go right to the building permit. We review building permits for accessory buildings. And so we check all these different things, whether they meet or not. They also have to submit accessory structures certification. I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but they need to tell us, is it for personal use? Is it for 100% agricultural use? Because if it's for 100% agricultural use, then we look at the setbacks and that's about it. It would jump out of those size standards at that point because the county supports that agricultural use.
Since this is Chris Iliff, since you'll be coming back to us with proposed regulations, I don't know that we need to drag this on any longer tonight. Have we given you enough guidance here to give us some proposed regulations that we can discuss?
Yes. Yes,
Right, good.
definitely.
This is Randy Downing. So I think one of the things too, would the neighbors rather see a larger building or see an RV parked outside all the time? I mean, I think you have to look at that stuff too, or a tractor that could be sitting outside or it could be sitting inside. I think when you look at that, there are some use variances that I think we should be taking into account.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for that very good discussion. One last question I was going to ask, I think Michelle pointed this out. What about the number of accessory buildings? Currently, as she mentioned, there's a limit of 3 for anything under 10 acres. Is there any concern about that? Should we continue to have it limited at 3 or should we allow more? Any first thoughts at that? Well, we could definitely discuss that when we present the amendments, but any initial thoughts?
I think when we get into the nitty gritty, we can work on that.
Sounds good.
Okay. Great.
This is Michelle Leiniger. What I will do is based on the discussion is I'll go into section 6 of that article and kind of comb through it and address some of the things that we've talked about tonight. And that at that point, I can give you some draft text changes. And then that way you can go in and get into the weeds and tweak it and be like, well, okay, it used to be 3, but now you propose 4. Do we care? Do we not care? Do you want to just have, 5 100 square foot accessory buildings as long as you're under the maximum square footage, things like that. That way you have, it's a little more defined and you're not thinking such a big picture.
All right. Item
Can I
number.
mention one more thing, Chairman?
Sure.
We've had a lot of pole barns, come before our board. And I would say the vast majority of them want like a lean-to overhang wherever their entry door is, or if they have sliders or, like a garage door. Is there a way that we can come up with something that will allow them to have that, but without taking actual square footage away from them?
Yes, currently in the code, the lean-to or the 3-sided basically, you're allowed 300 additional square feet for that. So you already get that freebie before it comes into play with the enclosed accessory building. And we can definitely bump that up too. So that, again, it's taking less of the enclosed square footage and kind of break them out a little bit more. And I'll propose bumping that up too.
All right. Next item on the agenda is New Century and Executive Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan.
Thank you, Chairman Sean Pendley, planning staff. We want to give a quick update on the status of this plan update for the airport plans for New Century and Executive Airport. If you recall, we mentioned the last meeting, we had a planning advisory committee meeting. There's a separate committee formed by members of this planning commission, also the airport commission, Board of County Commissioners, and respective cities. So we have representatives from the city of Olathe, Overland Park, and Gardner. We had our first advisory committee meeting in October, had a presentation from Kaufman Associates, our consultant that we're using on this update, provided a good background of the update for what we need to do for this, the update for both of the airport plans is very much in need of an update. They're both about 20 years old, so ready for an update. We have the next advisory committee meeting scheduled for January 30th. So that committee again will meet, we'll be discussing some of the first draft reviews from information that we've received from Kaufman Associates for updates to the plan. So we'll begin to talk more about land use compatibility plan updates for both of those airports. That's really the basis for this, is to look at the land use impact around both airports. So it's really important that we visit with the cities, and we have done that. We've met with the cities, and we'll have additional updates at that meeting on January 30th. In addition, we have scheduled or will be scheduling stakeholder meetings for both of those airports as well. Oftentimes, the real impact is when development is occurring around the airports, right? We need to have representatives from the development community, engineers, architects, those who are involved in development in those areas, invite them to a meeting to get their input. So we're also planning on having that the same day on January 30th. So we'll be inviting in development community, and then we'll follow up that meeting with 2 additional public information workshops, probably in February, to again get some first feedback from some of the residents and any other stakeholders. So work is progressing on that update. So some of you know who are on that committee. Look forward to having involvement at the next meeting, and then an update hopefully soon thereafter in the spring of 2023. Happy to answer any questions on that.
No, I just, as I was thinking about this being on the agenda, I noted that there was a plane hanging from some high power lines in Maryland at the end of a runway, and thinking, let's make sure that we don't put any more high power lines anywhere near any of these airports.
I saw that. I'm sure that made our executive director and deputy director cringe when they saw that. And there are a lot of things that happen that we just don't know about. The pilots, a big thing we were talking about is airport hazards, for the aircraft and the pilots' hazards. There are often bird strikes and other things that we don't even hear about. They have to deal with every day. So we certainly, as development continues around the airports, that's what we're trying to address with this. And so it's really helpful that we're meeting with all those stakeholders. And so far it's been a good process, and we need to continue to update both of those plans.
Kelly Grass, is there a section on the website that pertains to each one of these categories, kind of like the solar farm has its own, that we can follow? And
there is an update on our website. Yes, we're providing updates on the compatibility plan updates, and we do have on our planning homepage, for the county planning homepage, we do have an update on that. We don't have any content yet. We do have a link to the website that was created by the consultants for this update. So there's a link to that on our website, and that will, as we begin to get content for these plan updates, that will be posted on that link. But there's a link on our planning homepage.
Grant, does it have the meeting dates and stuff on there too? That
Yes, it
public
will have the
access.
meeture dates. I don't know if the next one is scheduled for the January 30th, but it will be soon.
It'll all be on the
We'll have that posted very soon, and we're going to be updating that website for sure this year.
Okay, great. Thanks.
All right. Anything further? Not, we'll go to the next item on the agenda, the Sunflower Army Ammunition Conceptual Land Use Plan.
Good to see all the planners this evening.
So Diane Wicklund, planning staff, just want to give a brief summary on the update of the Sunflower Area Plan. So the subcommittee has been formed to review the update of the Sunflower Area Plan, and we have had one meeting so far. In the following are the phases that we have developed so far of the work plan. And so phase 1 is kind of the introduction of the topic and the goals and purpose of the plan update. And so the goal of the update is to determine the appropriate future land uses of the remaining land within the county after the recent annexations by the city of DeSoto. And actually just to note that the city of DeSoto just approved kind of a second annexation area, which is now, so the first annexation went down to 127th Street. This second annexation that they just approved went down to 143rd Street. So pretty much the whole kind of plant area. So just kind of a side note on that. And so that kind of changes the scope of what the subcommittee is reviewing in terms of the update. So phase 2 is kind of gathering some information about the area to guide our decision on those best land uses for the future in this area. And so our next meeting is December 9th. And that will be where City of DeSoto and Johnson County Public Works will present their relevant information on the plan area. And then we have 2 more meetings so far scheduled after that, which is January 6th and January 27th, which we will continue to gather information. And those meetings will have presentations from Johnson County Wastewater District, Johnson County Environmental Department, Parks and Recreation District, and then Water 7 District staff. And then we kind of go into phase 3, which is just the subcommittee discussion of the information that we've received. And then when ready, phase 4 would be drafting the subcommittee recommendations for the plan update to then send to the full planning commission for review and discussion. And then just to note that part of that discussion will also include to determine the timing and extent and how we will get input from the public for the update. And then phase 5 would be just finalizing subcommittee recommendations to the planning commission. And so that's just kind of a summary of where we're at. So we're happy to have had the first meeting and get started on the project. So.
This is Mike Levin. Had a quick question on the bus tour on the 5th. Maybe I missed it, but is there a location of where we're meeting?
Yes, I believe what we're doing is I think we're going to be meeting here at the probably, and we'll be sending out more details on this, but I think the plan is just to meet here. Maybe we'll probably just maybe have people meet at the planning office, and then the kind of smaller bus that we're using from Parks and Rec. And then we'll all get on the bus here. So we'll meet here, probably, let's just say here at the planning department on the 2nd floor. And then we'll all go out to the bus. We'll leave, go do the tour. My guess is, I think we have it scheduled from like 1 to 4:30. By the time, we travel over to that side and come back, it'll probably take that amount of time.
Well, my question was, is it possible to then, if you need to leave from DeSoto to go somewhere else, can we take our own car, follow the bus, and then hop on the bus while we're there, but then when we're done?
Sure,
shoot out
we
to another-
could probably figure that detail out if we need to. Sure. Yeah. If you think you need to do something like that, let us know and we can coordinate that and figure out where you could leave a vehicle. And yeah.
Mike, that's a great idea. This is Terry Atwell.
Well, you live out there, but
Yeah, because I have to drive all the way to town just to turn around and go right back by my house. I mean, it doesn't make any, so that, I'm glad you brought that up.
Have a rendezvous place.
yeah, because I really want to do this, but I have to go somewhere afterwards. That's
Yeah,
going to
yeah,
actually be in
yeah.
the other direction. So I'm like, why come back?
So maybe we can do a little thinking and figure out a spot right at the beginning of the tour where we could pick up people.
Thank you.
if we
Where-
want. Yeah,
Is the
we'll
Dew,
try to do
is the
that.
Dew Drop Inn still open up in say,
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yes.
Jim Neese, I've got a question. Do we, as the city of DeSoto, given a final plan of what they're going to be doing it's on their west side, but it'd be the east side of our area? I mean, I've seen a preliminary thing. I mean, I'm looking forward to the DeSoto presentation,
Ye-
but have they got some hard?
So I believe one of the things that they'll be presenting at that meeting on December 9th is their their future land use plan that will show that area and what they're planning. And yeah, I believe,
This
city
is-
staff will be talking about what their plans are for that area.
This is Karen Miller, and their latest adopted plan was updated in 2021, but they are currently working with their planning commission, and I think
Mhm.
they have adopted something and they're going.
And my thought is how can, I mean, we can have all kinds of meetings. I talked to Jay about this earlier. What we're gonna do, but what we're gonna do is really what they're gonna do. And how they have their streets stubbed in and everything else. And I think we can, I mean, I don't need to go into that now. We talk about it in the committee meeting, but I really wonder if we're, if we're really, what we're going to establish is not going to be in stone because the city's going to, that development's what really going to dictate that area.
That's understood. And, we need to do something to have a good, a current plan for guiding our future land uses, but we do know that there will be some change. But, what we're doing now is just reviewing what's going on, and the subcommittee can decide anything they want to. Does the plan need to be updated? Do we need to revert to just a basic rural policy, or, that's the question. Let's look at what's going on and then make the decision.
I think what I would suggest is Jay Leipzig is after the meeting on the 9th, the subcommittee could talk again and look at what, especially after we meet with wastewater as well, and maybe look at revisions to that process, or if that needs to be changed. The other thing I was going to note is all of the plan updates will all be on the website, similar to what we just talked about for Executive Airport and the New Century Airport. So we'll have those documents as they become available will also be included on the link. Okay.
Yeah, Terry, well, because I live over there, I can tell you, they are moving fast and they are working 24/7, and they are working under lights because it's lit up like a football field from our back door. It's moving very fast.
All right. All right, next item on the agenda, updates and other business, and we have a copy of the BOCC actions. Anything further need to be said about that?
No, Mr. Chairman, Jay Leipzig, if there are any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them for you, but this is a standard document that we did include in the agenda.
Director's report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First item is the Overland Park official street map and comprehensive plan update. I think Sean Finley and I might tag team on this item, but just wanted to note that this item was sent to us for possible comments and updates. We did distribute this to our public works staff. They didn't have any additional comments. We did have a meeting though with the Overland Park planning staff, and they are in the process of updating their comprehensive plan. I think it's called OP Envision or Envision OP. And so one of the things that we discussed is they would like to make a presentation before this planning commission, probably sometime in the first quarter of 2023. So I'm thinking probably if we could do it in March, but probably in February, or if we couldn't do it in February, but probably in March of 2023, have them present to this group as well and provide an update on that. Any questions on that item?
And thanks, Jay. This is Sean Penley. I'm just going to add to that, as Jay mentioned, for that official street map for the city of Overland Park. If you notice in your packet, there's a map that's included, and they identify it's a very large city. So there's a lot of streets. You're never going to read through all of them, but it is helpful to see what we appreciated in getting that update. You may recall we've gotten this before, and we'll sometimes have the city present. And as Jay mentioned, we'll have the city of Overland Park present for their comprehensive plan update coming up next year. But the official street map is helpful to see because, as you notice, they not only show their current city limits and all the official street changes within the city, but then also the unincorporated area where they expect to grow to the south. And that's very helpful to see those future street changes. We don't typically do that in the county. We don't have a street map that designates future street improvements, but it is helpful to see this. And the city includes a note. There's a very small disclaimer. I wrote it out myself so I could read it. The major streets shown outside the city limits is recommended by the city of Overland Park to serve future land uses planned for the area. In most cases, the street system reflects adopted county transportation policies. Contact the county for the most up-to-date county transportation policies. As Jay mentioned, we did coordinate with Public Works staff on that because it is helpful to have that coordination to know, because they're showing, as you see in all those red streets that are outlined in that area, it is helpful to see what areas that they do have. And they do have some planned changes for some of the roads. Most of them follow the county arterial network that we would expect in the unincorporated area, but there's a couple of changes to that. And so we coordinate with the city, and that's why it's helpful, like Jay said, for us to continue to coordinate with the city staff, because we need to know what is planned outside of there, because it does impact the county. So it was helpful to get that, and we felt that it was a good plan update, and we didn't have any comments to that.
Thanks.
That was all. Thanks.
And the next item is the board member training follow-up. I wanted to follow up with this group at our last meeting. We did the training session. We'd like to have a follow-up discussion at our possible meeting in January. The fourth Tuesday in January would be January 24th. Peg Trent is available on that evening. So like to have a follow-up meeting on that in January. And then the next item is our December meeting schedule. Historically, this body has not met in December. We will either meet because we've got Thanksgiving and the Christmas holiday, both following the end of November and the end of December. So our next proposed meeting date in December could either be December 20th or December 27th. We don't have any current items to bring forward for this group. Certainly we won't be able to develop the regulations in great detail, I think, by December. So I would propose to just cancel the December meeting.
All in favor?
If you're all in favor
Aye.
of that. Okay, so then our next meeting in January, then will be the board member training follow-up, and also we'll have the year in review at that time.
Is the last training session online? Is that so you can review
I
that?
believe it is, right? Or it was recorded, Shanice. We could certainly get you a copy of that.
Yes, well, Sean Penley, I will check on that. I don't think it's online, but we do have a video recording.
Is
and
this the
audio.
September one?
Yes.
Yes, it's on the website.
Okay.
It's
Thank
on
you.
the website. Thanks,
What?
Megan.
Just to look it up, just go to the county website. Look
Here,
Yes.
What's it under?
if you look at your screen, I'll show you. Do you have your monitor on? Okay, so this is the main department page. So if we go to planning, it's actually under planning commission.
Okay.
And then it is, because we kind of we did have that training in place of the September meeting. And so it is actually under September.
Okay.
If this is the one we're talking about. And then there's an audio recording.
All right. Thank you.
And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Any other business to come before us tonight? If not, do I hear a motion to adjourn? Been moved, seconded by Mr. Lund. All in favor? Aye. We're adjourned.